Welcome to By George, an 80 Players podcast here at the George Theater. I am your host and marketing associate, Miranda Zapes, and today I have with me...
Hi, I'm Samantha Patterson. I am the costume shop manager here at 80 Players, and I am also the costume designer for Driving Miss Daisy.
I'm so glad to talk to you today because I know nothing about costume designing, so I'm going to have so many questions. Please bear with me if they're a little silly.
I love talking about it, so because not a lot of people know about it that much. So
yeah, and I feel like it's an underappreciated aspect in both film and in theater. I mean, unless you know that side of it, nobody's really looking at it and they're like, oh, but you notice if it's bad.
Yeah,
you
I would say a lot of design elements, you notice if it's bad.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
So sometimes not being noticed is the best.
No, exactly. It's the greatest compliment.
Yeah.
So today we're going to get into all things costume shop. We're going to get into all things Driving Miss Daisy. But first, I want to hear about how you came to work in costume design and costume managing and how you came to 80 Players.
I grew up, my mom sewed quite a bit. She would sew usually, when we were kids, she would sew us little matching outfits for Christmas and holidays and stuff. She would always sew Halloween costumes and homecoming dresses, things like that for me. And so I just grew up around sewing and was interested in it. As I got older, every Halloween, it was okay, I can design my own costume and go pick out a pattern in the fabric. And she would still mostly do a lot of it for me, but I felt like I was kind of a part of the process a little more and learned how to sew a little bit more. I went to a really, really tiny private Catholic high school. So we didn't really have a theater department, but my theater teacher was really great. And she would bring in her sewing machine and be like, is there anything you want to build for this? We can't do a full built or designed show, but if you can find one thing in the show that you want to build, I can try and help you. We didn't have a program for that, but she was really great about seeing what all of our interests were and trying to help us, even though we didn't have a full-fledged theater department. So in high school was when I think I realized that I enjoyed being around other creative theater people, but I did not want to be on stage.
Gotcha.
In high school, I was good at math and science, but I didn't really see myself pursuing that. So I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And my mom kind of forced me to go to a college fair. And there was a woman there who had a table for a program it was actually a program that was more fashion design with an emphasis in film costume design, I think. But it kind of got me, it was oh, that's I can sew and be in theater and not have to be an actor. I think a lot of us, you think theater, you're oh, acting.
Yeah, of course.
At that age. So it really opened my eyes to what was possible in terms of careers in theater that I was interested in and able to do and pursue. So I kind of started thinking about it through talking to this woman who was from California. I started looking at schools in Texas that had fashion design initially because I kind of thought okay, the way you do costume design is you do fashion design and then you do costume stuff after that. Again, I realized it was a field, but there's not a lot of guidance on how to become a theater production professional. So I settled on Baylor University is where I went and did my undergrad. I went to orientation and I signed up for all my fashion classes. And my mom, I'm this is a reoccurring theme. My mom forces me to do stuff and it ends up changing my life. But I feel that's happens to a lot of people.
It's they
moms
know
are smart.
Better.
They're wise.
Exactly.
So she was you need to go to the theater department. I was no, I don't want to. I don't want to talk to. I'm new environment. You're already overwhelmed. I'm I just want to go. And I finished all my stuff. And she's no, we're going to the theater department. You're going to see if there's if you can help or if you can take a class. And the costume design professor just happened to be there. And she was no, we have a whole program for this.
Whoa.
Which is interesting because I told my advisors at Baylor, I want to do costumes. And they were oh, fashion. A similar thing actually happened to my husband. He was I want to do lighting and sound. And they were oh, do film and digital media, which is kind of overlaps, but again, interesting that even at a college that has that program, nobody's really aware that that's something you can do. So I was a fashion major for 3 hours. And then I changed. Once I went to go talk to the theater people in the theater department, I changed all my classes. I actually got a dorm right next to the fashion building. And now the theater building was completely across campus. So it was great, not horrible, but it's just funny that I had my whole
Yeah,
my whole
everything.
plan, and then it's like, oh, never mind, let me do this.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a setup for working in theater, I guess. It kind of happens to us a lot. So that's where I did my undergrad. Finished, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I wasn't sick of school. And one of my professors let me know that grad school is a really good option. A lot of grad schools will actually pay you to go to school and teach classes. So I went to this, I call it like grad school speed dating, but it was in Chicago. And you set up like a portfolio table and then you leave. And then people from schools all come in and look at your portfolio and stuff and sign up on a little sheet.
Yeah.
And then they like bring everybody in 5-minute sessions. Those are more for you to ask about the program, but it was like boom, boom. I think I had like 15 interviews set up, which was a lot. I was like, oh, okay, I could actually do this. I found out that there's a program in Houston. I'm from Katy, like I said. So, and I'm like a big family person. So I was like, oh, I could like move home and still do this and feel a little more stable in this kind of unstable period of my life. Like I said, I wasn't really sick of school. I was like, I could keep doing this for a while.
No, yeah.
So I started at U of H in 2013. I did 3 years there. I did HSF every summer while I was there. So I learned a ton of stuff about patterning. I actually my emphasis was historical tailoring. So not as much here, but when I was in grad school, the majority of my projects were historical menswear and things like that. So for my final, I actually made a full outfit for my thesis. It was a full outfit for myself and my husband that were like 18th century menswear inspired riding garments for me, and then like a full 18th century menswear look for Brandon, my husband.
Wow.
So that was really fun. And those pictures are silly, but I'm glad that they're like fun to have, fun to look back on. So
no, of course.
And then finished at U of H. I knew I wanted to do costumes. I knew I wanted to make patterns, but I was like, I don't know what I want to do. And one of my friends that I had always done HSF with, theater is so weird. It's like so much who you know and kind of just like, oh, and then I ended up here. And then I knew this person that needed a job here.
Yeah.
So one of the women that I worked with every summer at HSF she did wardrobe at the Alley. And so she was like, do wardrobe this summer for HSF. I'll like teach you everything you need to know. It'll be a crash course in wardrobe, because I had done patterning mainly at school, but I hadn't really done a lot of like backstage on the job, wardrobe, changing actors, all of that. So she was like, I'll put you through this crash course and then you'll be able to come do a show at the Alley. So I started doing wardrobe at the Alley right after I finished with HSF after I graduated. I really love doing wardrobe. It's like, I always say it's not a super sustainable theater job because you're like running around all the time. And also it's evenings and weekends and stuff. And I just wanted a little more family time.
Of course.
So I was doing freelance all over. I was kind of doing wardrobe at night and then working in different shops and stuff during the day. I had a connection that I met at U of H. She wasn't even a theater major. She was like an arts, I think it was like interdisciplinary arts, kind of build your own major. And she happened to be taking a costume class with me. And she was like, you were the only one who was nice to me in class, because everyone else was kind of like, who's this person like in our costume class? They're not even a design major. But she was like, you were always really nice to me and we connected. Do you want to come work with me here? So I started at 80 Players. So I started working at 80 Players on like a freelance over hire basis. I would come in, it would kind of be like, we need this garment made. How many hours is it going to take? Okay, you'll come in, do that many hours, and then go work at another theater. Okay. When I first started talking to this friend from school, it was like, maybe in a couple years, we'll have a full-time position. This would be a good way to get your foot in the door at the theater, get to know people. That way, when that opens up, you could kind of like ease into that position. Well, that happened like 3 months later. So I ended up, and like, it would have been like summer 2018 is when I found out about that. I got married in August, went on my honeymoon, came back and started working like the week after that. Wow. And I've been here ever since. So I started working here as a pattern maker, as a draper. So we do a lot at the shop because there are less people, but my main focus was just making patterns and things like that. And then the costume shop manager at the time went on to get a teaching job. And so I moved up into the shop manager position in summer of 2019. And I've been shop manager ever since.
Wow.
So I know that's a very long,
No, but
long and detailed history, but
I love hearing people's stories.
when you look back, it really is crazy. All these very like synchronous things that had to happen in a very specific way. People you had to meet, things you had, random things your mom forces you to do.
Yeah,
and it's really crazy looking back and being like, oh, every single one of those things had to be, those were all stepping stones on my path that were meant to be there. Even though at the time you're just kind of like, oh, okay, whatever, sure. So,
yeah. I feel the exact same way. And that's why I love bringing people on and hearing their stories of how they got here, because hindsight's obviously 2020. And so when you look back, you're like, yeah, everything happened for a reason, even if you didn't go the exact way you thought you were going to go or that you hoped that you were going to go. So that's so cool. So first off, you keep saying
HSF, sorry.
HFF,
Houston Shakespeare Festival.
Gotcha.
Is HSF. Okay. It's out at Miller every summer. It's like, I always say it's like whirlwind costuming. We do 2 shows in rep. So every other night, it's like 2 weeks of every other night doing each show. And there's like 6 weeks in the shop, I think, before to build it. So,
gotcha. Okay.
A lot of grad students at U of H, it's kind of like the summer stock that a lot of grad students do. So it's, unless you're from out of town and you want to go home and work at home or just go home in general, a lot of people that at U of H just do HSF in the summer, Houston Shakespeare Festival in the summer. And it's out of the shops at U of H. So the costume shop and the scene shop and all of that. So we build everything at U of H, load it all out to Miller, do 2 weeks of performances, and then bring it all back and then get ready for the school year after that. So,
whoa, my goodness.
Yeah. And this year's the 50th anniversary.
Whoa,
so I'm sure they're going to be doing all kinds of stuff. So, and it's free if you want to go out to Miller and see some Shakespeare.
I have never, I see when I do the bios for people in the playbill, I see the Houston Shakespeare Festival, but I didn't know it was completely free as well. So that's awesome.
It's free. You can like show up anytime and sit on the hill. If you want reserved seats like in the front, it's still free. You just have to show up in the morning and like reserve a ticket.
That's so cool. Well, okay, getting back to costuming, can you tell me a little bit more about like because you were talking about you're the costume manager and there are drapers and there's people who make the patterns. And then you said that there's also people like on stage and you're doing the wardrobe behind the scenes. What are kind of the different aspects of the costume shop?
So like I said, at 80 players, we're a really small costume shop. Right now, there are 2 of us.
Gotcha.
With we have part-time overhire and help and things that help us with our bigger shows. But we just kind of have the title of costume technician because we have to wear so many hats to get everything done here. But in a like big costume shop with 20 people, things are a little more specialized. Gotcha. So you have your costume designers who are the ones who are researching everything, communicating with the director, coming up with the concepts for the shows and all of that. They submit research and renderings. They also are, when we're actually doing the shows, they're responsible for finding all the pieces. So going around and pulling things, shopping, deciding what we want to make, all of that. So that's the costume designer. Sometimes in bigger theaters, you'll have a design assistant who is just more in charge of like, I need fabric that looks like this and this many buttons and, pantyhose for these people. You go out and shop or go find links for me or help me with my paperwork. Just kind of on a bigger show, sometimes you need that support of someone just kind of almost like an admin costume person. The costume shop manager, which is my position here, is usually just in charge of overseeing all of those, all of the working pieces in the shop that I'll talk about in a minute, and just making sure that everybody has all of the tools and supplies and everything they need. And information is really important. So I do that. And then I also do notes and build and pattern and things here. The way that builds kind of move through the costume shop, normally those start with a cutter or draper. So that's the person who's making the patterns. Doing draping is, I always say it's like, I guess Project Runway isn't as relevant of a reference anymore, but that's what I always compare it to when you see people doing stuff on a dress form. That's draping. So usually you drape it in fabric and then you mark on the fabric, trace everything out, and then you unpin all of that, lay it out flat on your table, and then use a tracing wheel to trace those shapes onto paper. And then you take the paper to make, it's like you take the fabric to make the paper, and then the paper you make the fabric. So then you make what we call a mock-up out of muslin, which is just an unbleached, cheap cotton.
Gotcha.
So we initially take the pattern. A cutter is also somebody who makes patterns, but that is generally, I say it's more of like a cookbook. So you like have a book that tells you like the neck to waist measurement is this line here, and then halfway down that, or, 2/3 of the way down that line, make a right angle and make, do the waist measurement divide plus 2 inches divided by 4, or it's a lot of math and formulas, but it's very step by step, and it's geometry and drawing lines and things like that, which is actually how I generally prefer to pattern. That's how a lot of tailoring is done.
Okay.
So those are kind of your 2 ways that you can make a pattern, is either draping on the form or just going straight to the paper and using more shapes and math and angles and things like that.
Yeah.
You finalize your paper pattern, trace it onto that unbleached muslin cotton fabric, and then we make a mock-up out of that, because we don't really, a lot of times your pattern, everybody's body is so different. Even when you have everybody's measurements, we make like a test out of cheaper fabric, so we're not wasting our expensive good fabric for the show.
Of course.
So we do a mock-up first, do a fitting with the actors of the mock-up, mark anything on there that we need to, take any notes or things like that, and then go back to the paper with that, your new pieces. Usually you'll like take apart the mock-up, and then you can lay your pieces back out, see kind of where you pin things in or where you need to add more. Edit your pattern paper again, trace it and cut it out of the real fabric.
Okay.
And then we fit it again, just to make sure that you put it together kind of like most of the way, not a lot of finishing details and hems and buttons and closures and stuff like that. But as far along as it needs to be for us to try it on again, make any notes to the pattern again. Then you cut out your facings and your linings, which are all of the inside pieces.
Okay.
A lot of time, a facing is like, if you had a vest, like the 2 inches around the border would usually be the same fabric as the outside. That way you don't see the lining poking through. So it's kind of like a piece together, the facing along the edge and then the lining on the rest of it.
Okay.
So yeah, then you pattern your facings and your linings, cut that out, do all the inside pieces.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have time to fit that again. Sometimes you're like, okay, I'm just going to finish it for tech and that'll be a fitting.
Yeah.
If it doesn't fit, then I'll know. So then we look at it on stage, make any notes again, and then go back. And the week that we're in right now, in between tech and opening, we go back and make any notes and things. As that whole process is going, we're also, because we don't build everything. We build, like for Driving Miss Daisy, we're only building one garment. Sometimes bigger shows where we can't find things, we build a little bit more. But as we are building all of these things, we're also fitting things that we found either through shopping or we pull a lot from Stages and from U of H. So we kind of have like a share system. We have one big closet between all 3 of us.
That's awesome.
So we kind of borrow from each other as long as we aren't using it for our own shows.
Yeah.
So that's where we get a lot of our stuff. We will buy stuff, pull stuff from our own stock. Obviously, that's where we go look first. So as we're building all of our builds, we're fitting all those things, doing the notes on all of those things, getting all of the blows ready, labeling everything. So that is kind of the structure of the shop. You also, in a bigger shop, sometimes have a craft department, which is like shoes, painting, dyeing, hats. Like what else would be crafts? Sometimes like leather work, jewelry, anything that's not like fabric based, I guess, would be costume crafts is what we call that. So in a bigger theater, you might have a costume crafts department, but here it's just kind of like, okay, who has time? And do you know how to do this? Or sometimes it's like, do you want to learn how to do this while working on this project? So when we used to have a touring company, we did a whole project for Lion Witch in the Wardrobe on learning how to do cast masks, because it was like, this would be a helpful thing. Let's learn how to do this. So sometimes we kind of have to learn on the job, or I'm like, Google and books and YouTube are your best friends sometimes.
Most definitely. Yeah.
So yeah, we also have, that's another thing, another plate that's spinning while we're building and fitting, doing notes on everything that we fit. We also have the craft world spinning. A lot of times we do that stuff, try to do that stuff right away, because we send shoes to rehearsal. So shoe notes, anytime we get shoe notes, it's like, okay, pause what you're doing over here, go to the shoe note, and then send it back to rehearsal. A lot of other big theaters also have a wig department. So usually someone who's in charge of all of that, wigs, hair, and makeup. We usually contract that in, because not every show.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I can pretend to style a wig, but I fake it till I make it with that. But I'm not. It is definitely the thing that in the world of costumes that like people are always like, oh, you're a costume person, you know about hair. I'm like, no. People always ask me like, you cut hair? I'm like, they're like, but you cut fabric. I'm like, oh, it's so different.
Yeah, this is very, I don't know if you've noticed, but hair and your clothes are not the same.
So that's sometimes a whole separate department. But again, something that we either handle in-house, or if we can't, we kind of send out a lifeline of trying to bring in outside contractors and things like that. Like, what else? Yeah. So all of those things are going on in the shop. As we get closer to tech, we'll usually bring in our wardrobe supervisor who, like, the costume shop is in charge of creating all of the costumes. And then we kind of like pass it off to wardrobe. We both overlap during tech. And then wardrobe will take that and run with it and kind of maintain the integrity of the show throughout the run of the show.
Okay.
So wardrobe will come in that last week before we start tech, make sure that everything is labeled. I generally generate a lot of the paperwork for shows. So we have, because wardrobe isn't in the shop all the time, there's a lot of information that in costumes that you have to have really, really thorough paperwork, because it's like, okay, at tech, when we're all in this one room, we don't want to waste anybody's time like talking about things or figuring things out. You want to have everybody have all of that information so that we're not wasting each other's time, because it's such an intensive process. So paperwork and all of that is really important for getting that information from the designer's head into the shop's head and then passing that off to wardrobe. So that week, like I said, is just kind of getting wardrobe up to speed, bringing them into the world of the show. They make sure that, because, you know, we try to label things as we go, but obviously wardrobe is more concerned about that because they're the ones that have to keep everything organized. So exactly. It's like, I'm going to go ahead and do the things that will make my job easier, which is helpful. It's not selfish. It's helpful because we are not able to focus on that at that point. Yeah. So it's always super helpful once wardrobe comes in and it's like, okay, great. All the stuff that I haven't had time to pay attention to.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So we also have check-in sheets. So wardrobe will check everything in, make sure that everything's ready to go for the show. Right now we're actually working out of the George, but typically we will load everything out from the costume shop over to the theater on Friday before tech. Tech, we just kind of, I just observe. Wardrobe is running around like their hair's on fire backstage because, like I said, you want to have as much information as possible, but it's kind of like, okay, here you go, jump in the deep end, and figure it out. So we sit out and watch and take any notes. Me, the costume shop manager, and the designer, which right now is just me.
It's just you,
Marissa has, anytime I design, Marissa comes and helps me out during tech, just so she can be my eyes and ears if I have to take off my designer hat and go do a costume shop manager thing. She'll help me with that, or vice versa. So we sit out and take any notes, then go back and do the notes during this week. And then by the time we get to opening, ideally, everything is done. Yeah. So usually, that's usually how that happens.
If ever in a perfect world.
I always say it's my dreamy dream world. I talk about that a lot in costuming. It's like, in my dreamy dream world, I would have this. But.
Yeah. That's so cool. I'm glad that you touched on it, because that was one of my other questions. I was watching you guys as we were doing the fittings for Driving Miss Daisy, how much of that comes from like a stock that you guys have, and do you keep it afterwards, or does it go to another theater? Because I would hate to think that like we buy these costumes and then they never get used again.
I try really hard to use stock first, because when you're just buying stuff all the time, you're like, ooh, I don't want to just and I don't know how the scene shop does it, because they literally build it and throw it away. We have a giant closet, so we build it and then put it in the closet. So I'm like, oh man, that would be so tough. But because of that, we always try and pull first. Usually once we get designs turned in, we'll pull in our stock and then make appointments to go pull around town. We also sometimes, like during Forever Plaid, I had to just cold call other theaters that had done this show before. We ended up getting the jackets that we ordered, but in the meantime, for previews and things. So sometimes we borrow stuff from all over the country. I just Googled Forever Plaid, who's done this recently, and then call people, and I think they were from like Idaho or something like that. Anyways, it is nice to be able to save all of our things that we've made. I know Alex in the show in Driving Miss Daisy, he plays Hoke. He really likes his jacket. And he's like, what are you guys going to do with this jacket after the show? And I was like, keep it in stock. And he was like, well, you'll use it again? Like you'll have someone sized like me? I'm like, we'll probably use it. So it's just funny.
That was going to be my next question. So like, when you have stock, is there ever any hesitancy when you have to do alterations for maybe a smaller body type, and that like, well, maybe we can use this down the road and it would need to be a bigger body type? Do you have to think of those kinds of things?
So a lot of times we try to do alterations without cutting anything.
Gotcha.
And when we build stuff, we try to always put at least an inch seam allowance. Sometimes you have to let stuff out even for that show, so it ends up being less. But usually in every scene, we try to do an inch of seam allowance so that it is let outable. But we've done some pretty creative things to not have to cut something. And when it's from another theater, you definitely can't cut anything. So sometimes it gets pretty interesting when you look on the inside of things. When I used to do Christmas Carol at the Alley You used to look inside the kids' pants because they were like adult pants that they had just made smaller. And the hems were so much that they were up to their like mid thigh.
Oh my gosh.
So sometimes you're like, I just, turn it up and stitch it down and hope that it's in the dark and from far away.
Yeah,
exactly. That nobody
Exactly.
really sees it up close. So that is the other nice thing is like, you're going to look at it from far away. So it kind of just needs to look like a general idea of what it's supposed to be as long as it looks good from far away.
Yeah, you have to do what you have to do sometimes. So tell me about, we're already running out of time. I feel like I could talk to you all day, but I want to hear you, as you're the costume designer for Driving Miss Daisy, what was the process like for designing, and where did you, I know we talked a little bit about it when we were doing the fittings, and you just kind of, you're in dreamy dream world that you have. And so just what was that process like?
So like I said, I like to talk about like in my dreamy dream world. So whenever you're designing a show, I always say that you kind of design it in that dreamy dream world at first, where you're like, if money was no object and I had anything in stock and the actors all fit everything that I found, this is what I would want to do. So you start with your dreamy dream world. And then as the costume designer, a lot of people think like, oh, I'm going to just do whatever I want. But any design element, I always say the director's like the captain of the ship. You're just like one of the first mates. So yes, it is about your dreamy dream world, but it's ultimately one person who has that clear vision to kind of guide the ship to get us where we're trying to go. So you have your dreamy dream world, and then you talk to the director and you figure out, okay, now we're going to edit a little bit to make my dreamy dream world and the director's dreamy dream world jive together. And then you get your actors and you get your measurements. So then it's like, okay, well, based on what I can find and what we have in stock and different measurements and what would look good on certain people and all of that, then you edit that down a little bit more. And then you're like, okay, now I know the timing and this is a quick change. So you can't change here, or whatever you wear needs to fit underneath. So then you edit that down a little bit. I know Daisy specifically, we were just trying to, I said we do this all the time, but for this show specifically, we really were trying to use things that we had, things that we could find. So we went out and pulled, I started talking with Alice after I pulled, actually, because that's kind of backwards how we normally do things, but I kind of wanted to know like what was available. Finding reproduction stuff in this time period is also kind of tricky. There's a lot of like 50s, 60s rockabilly reproductions, 70s. It's kind of like whatever's trending right now. But yeah, trying to shop new stuff that looks old was a little trickier for this. So really tried to focus on a stock-oriented design. So I went through and pulled everything that I thought might work, went and talked to Alice. I put together kind of a slideshow of what I was thinking, talked through what she was thinking, edited that down a little bit. When she and I first started talking, she was like, I want this show to feel cozy and like a big comfy couch. I was like, okay. So I really felt drawn to that, and I started looking at like mid-century couch fabric, which sounds very weird, but I was trying to figure out my color palette, and I kind of came up with this idea of a tapestry. A lot of mid-century 50s, 60s couches are that kind of like tapestry look. So that's kind of where I started with my color palette. I also like the idea of how we all kind of are woven into each other's. It sounds very cheesy, but like all of our lives are a tapestry. And as you meet people, that becomes a part of your tapestry. And especially seeing this relationship with Daisy and Hoke and how they're completely different. They come together and become a part of each other's beautiful tapestries of their lives. So that was kind of like even more pushed me into like this tapestry world for the color palette. So that's where I started with that color palette, then went back to my things that I had pulled, edited what is kind of in that world, I put it all on dress forms, took pictures of everything, and then sent that to Alice. She's really busy with all of the things that she does. So I tried to really have like nailed down information when we were able to talk. So putting everything on dress forms and presenting that to her was a little bit easier for me to kind of convey what I was thinking to her. So we started talking, edited things down again based on what her opinions were. And then we start fitting, because really, like I say, it's your dreamy dream world, but then you're like, oh, well, that doesn't fit. So I mean, you saw me doing that. You're like,
no,
but it's not what I drew, but okay, moving on.
Yeah.
So that's kind of affects your design as well. Like I said, we built one thing for the show. So usually if there's something that you're like, okay, this is something that I feel really strongly about, or this is like Alex, I think is like 6'5". So it was like, okay, tall guy, probably not going to find something, because in the 50s, people were so much smaller than we are now. So it was like, okay, probably not going to find anything vintage out in the world. So you're like, okay, that's what I'm going to put my money on. And he's kind of in his uniform jacket for most of the show. So we really wanted that to be like kind of a star piece for him.
Yeah.
So that's how we made the choice to build that. But yeah, really just found everything. There are one of Patty's dresses or Daisy's dresses for the show is a purchase. And then almost everything else we found. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's so much, but that's so cool as well.
Yeah.
I love that you talked about like the tapestry. And so in all of these moments that you're talking about, I want to give our audience a chance. Like when you come in and come see Driving Miss Daisy, as you should, be on the lookout for all of these little things. Like the tapestry and the fact that Hoke's jacket was created. I also want to ask you, because you said that you did your initial like study in historical design or historical pieces. Is Driving Miss Daisy considered historical? Because it feels like very recent compared to like, I don't know, 1700s or 1800s. Is this something that you looked forward to doing and felt was very in your wheelhouse?
Yeah. So I really enjoy research-based shows more than like concept-based shows. Okay. So I am like, I need to find something that really existed and find that picture and then like piece all of those things together to be my design rather than like coming up with something that doesn't exist. That's a whole other kind of design talent that I am not the best at. My strengths are definitely more historically based research shows. Yeah. So that was kind of why I picked that. Kingdom Undone was definitely more like concept-y. And so that's why I was like, Marissa, if you want to do this, that's fine with me. I'll do Steel and Daisy because those are a little more like research based. Yeah. So that was kind of a part of the decision, I guess. Yeah, making that. But I really consider anything other than modern historical because you really want to get an honest picture of that time period. So I think there's even now there's research involved. Like Marissa and I co-designed No One Owns Me, which was a modern show. Okay. And we still did a lot of research on that. It was more looking at like fashion influencers and what people are wearing now and going to the mall and just kind of looking at what's out there, what would be available to these characters if they were shopping. So we did a lot of like shopping and talking and like it's a light, shopping is a lighthearted activity, but we're talking about like the perception of women's bodies and messages that we send with our clothing and the way that people perceive women's bodies and things like that, which is, if you saw the show, is very relevant to the show. So yeah, it's just a different kind of research. So this show, I did a lot of research with pattern images, like images on the front of patterns, and then also a really great resource for this time period is Sears catalogs. So when we all used to get your big catalog in the mail, or you'd go to the store with the catalog and call on the phone and order, those ads generally are a better depiction of what like real people were wearing rather than kind of like what was on the runway at that time period. So that was a lot of what I used for the show was Sears catalogs.
There you go. Nice. Yeah. Man, there's just so much. It's a lot. And it's so wonderful to hear you talk about it and to see you actually get to do the thing that you love. And I mean, I was so grateful that I got to be in that fitting. And while you were running through all of the designs, I'm going to have to put them up in the episode so you can see your wonderful drawings. I was talking to Marissa and I was like, this is like, how do you guys do this? Like all the time, there's so many moving pieces.
Someone who used to work at 80 Players went and is teaching now. And she had to kind of do the costume design for her show. Yeah. And she was like, I don't know how you do it. I was like, I sleep for a week afterwards. That's how I do it.
Yes, of course.
Basically just go and then rest. Theater's very like cyclical of like, we do the build up and then the tech and then we open and then you rest and relax for a little bit. So it's all about using your rest time.
Exactly. Just
advantageously.
Of course. And knowing how, time management and everything. Well, I want to get in. I have one final question, then we're going to get into our lightning round. I want to ask you directly. When people come in and they see the show, is there anything that you've done, any like maybe little Easter eggs with the costuming that people should be on the lookout for, or something really exciting to you that you did with the costumes?
I don't know. I guess a challenge with the show is how quick the changes are. Okay. So it's a lot of like, how can I just add one piece and make it look like a different outfit? So you'll definitely see a lot of like mixing and matching, I guess. Yeah. And then covering things up, hiding what I'm wearing underneath what I'm wearing over on the top. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I always, when I go see a show, tell like, is someone changing right now? Like, because I think it's always really interesting when you can't tell that there's been a quick change. Like sometimes it's obvious. You're like, oh, they're like vamping on stage. But that's something I guess I always look out for is like, can I tell someone's doing a quick change right now? Or like, did I notice that? Yeah. So that's something. There are lots and lots of quick changes. Our wardrobe supervisor, Lisa, is like crushing it back there. I always tell her she's the queen of like making it look effortless from our perspective. Yeah. But then I check in with her and she's like, I mean, things are good, but and I'm like, well, you made it look great.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think anybody out there knew.
So yeah, she's working her tail off back there. But yeah, I guess just the mixing and matching was a fun aspect of this show. So any other secret sneaky stuff I did?
I know, because I always like, I mean, at least when it comes to me doing anything in that creative field, and again, I'm more of like a logistical person kind of behind the scenes. But when I get to like direct or I get to design or something, I love putting in little Easter eggs. And even the signs that we put up around the place, I'm always trying to make it in theme with what we're doing, or using specific handwriting, or having, I don't know, little jokes and things inside of it. So I was just wondering if anything specifically with this show had gone on. But I think bringing up quick changes is really important because, like we were saying at the beginning, a lot of it goes unnoticed, and that means that you've done a good job if it goes unnoticed. Yeah, but also to bring a little bit of appreciation to the costume shop and to the wardrobe team, and that all of this is going on behind the scenes. So when you do come in and watch it, keep an eye out for that. Or if you have come and seen it and then you're watching this, look how well they did that.
Appreciate
you didn't even notice.
The hard work.
Exactly. This is an appreciation episode of the podcast. Okay, we're going to get into our lightning round questions. So my first one, if you've listened to all of our other episodes, you know, what is a horror story or a mishap that has happened on stage? Or in
it's like mine or backstage, but I can definitely tell you one.
Something just in the theater realm that has gone on.
So the most like crazy, ridiculous show I've probably ever done was The Great Society at the Alley.
Okay.
And I did wardrobe. I was a dresser on that show. And I want to say there were like 150 quick changes in the show. Not just changes, quick changes. Like each there were like 6 dressers, and each of us had like 20 to 30 quick changes.
Whoa.
So tech for that was a whole thing. It was a stage manager from Dallas, and the way that she liked to tech things was like slowly go through everything and then go back and just run everything that we had already done without ever having really done it in time. So it was a lot of like, we joked around that we should put like GoPros on our head. It would be very like Blair Witch of us just like running around backstage. Like, I don't know what's going on. But we finished the first, like anytime we would run anything, we're just like, oh my gosh, I'm so sweaty. I need to take a break. Because you're running to the next thing because you don't know how much time you have. You're like, I just know I need to be there quick. So I'm going to get this done as quick as I can and then run to the next thing. But the way that we ended up running that show was one of the dressers, my friend Marissa, not the Marissa who works here, a different Marissa. Okay. But she had one booth backstage, and she had to preset every single change she had, like kind of layered on top of each other. Because once the show started, she's like, I can't leave the booth. I can't set anything. And I don't remember exactly how it happened, but one of the actors came backstage and changed into the wrong thing. And it was like, we ended up making it work, but just watching them go back and like undoing that without affecting all of the other dominoes that needed to fall after that was crazy, crazy, crazy. And then there was another instance where an actor came into that booth and took off his whole costume, like as you do when you're changing. Took off all his, it sounds weird, took off all his clothes, but took off his costume as he was supposed to. Yeah. And Marissa, my friend, was like, you're not supposed to change here. You're supposed to be in your dressing room. And so he started to go, but it was like the clothes that he took off had to be in the dressing room for the next time he had to put them on. Okay. So it was like, no, you got to take your clothes and go. So he was running around backstage in his like undershirt and underwear. Yeah. But with his costume. Just like, I don't, and like, yeah, like, where's my dresser? I don't know where to go. No. So yeah. And it was just a crazy, crazy show, but we made it through. And it was, I would say those are like the most like fondly looked back on shows when you're like, oh my gosh, that was crazy, but it was so much fun. So
of course, but we made it. Yeah.
I miss doing wardrobe because it's definitely the like, I don't have a big adrenaline junkie side of me, but I feel like wardrobe satisfies that little piece of me that enjoys the like aspect of
that wardrobe. Sounds exactly what I need. Like I chase adrenaline, and so that's just so fascinating to hear it, and just. I want a GoPro on somebody's head now because I have to see what's going on.
If we ever do a crazy show, that would be, I mean, it's tricky because you're like with people taking their clothes off. But if you're doing changes that aren't like full strip downs, it's pretty fun. It would be a fun thing to do. So we'll have to strategically find a show where we can do that on. So that would be fun. Maybe even this show because they don't there's a lot of changes where they don't like take everything off. Yeah. So maybe
we'll have to strategize. My next question, because we're doing Driving Miss Daisy, and it is a story of friendship. Ultimately, I want to ask: do you have any stories, maybe of your best friend of the first time that you had met them, or maybe somebody that you became unlikely friends with?
It was like literally Marissa just popped her head out of that door and walked around the corner, and that's probably who I would talk about. Yeah. So Marissa and I met at the Alley. She's one of my like trauma bonded friends of going through tech and everything over there. She worked over hire in the shop at the Alley for like 2 years. And there was a time period where they were kind of like, oh, sorry, we don't have work for you. So she had done a lot of wardrobe. So she was like, oh, I'll bounce down and do wardrobe.
Yeah.
And so she and I met during that. We weren't super close. Like, we were in a really close friend group. I wouldn't say we were like best friends within that group when we worked at the Alley, but I still keep in touch with that group. We try to get together every 2 months, just because it's like, when you don't work together, you never see your friends in theater unless you really try. That's something as an adult, you're like, oh, I have to make an effort to hang out with my friends. So she and I met at the Alley. We were in a really close friend group. And then when I moved up into my position here, my old position became available and she applied for that. And it was like, and she's like, other than being one of my close friends, she's insanely talented. Yeah. So it was like, oh my gosh, we have to hire Marissa. And then just through working together, like I said, we're a really small costume shop and we've really, really, really been through a lot, both at the Alley and life and here. And yeah, I couldn't do it without her. She's my right-hand woman, and like for work and just emotional support. So yeah.
That's awesome. It's great when you get to work with your friends.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You have your ups and downs, but ultimately, I mean, they make it worth getting through the day. Like on those days when you just don't want to come in and you don't want to do it, and you're like, oh, but I'm going to get to see.
Yeah.
Exactly. My final question is, why should people come see Driving Miss Daisy?
One thing that's really important about theater is showing that we are all very different, but we have so many shared experiences that someone who is so different from you is really not. I think theater in general shows us that, but I think this show is a really pointed example of that, because that's kind of the point of the show, the main story of the show. So I think it's a really good, it highlights what I love about theater in general, is showing how we're all very different, but we're all very similar, and we can still get along and relate to each other and be there for each other and all of that.
I agree 100%.
And why people should come see it. Yeah. To experience somebody's story that's not yours.
Yeah.
Soak that up.
Just, it's feel good. It's
cozy couch. Like I said, Alice said cozy couch.
It's most definitely cozy couch. And this, just seeing the rehearsals and everything so far, it's a wonderful story, and the actors are doing phenomenal. And I just can't wait to see it actually come to life. Yeah. But thank you so much for being on this episode.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. I'm so glad that we got to see a little bit more about behind the scenes. So thank you guys so much for listening. We are shooting in our photo booth. So make sure when you come in and see Driving Miss Daisy, as you all should, running through April 17th through May 12th. Be sure to get your photo taken in our photo booth that is behind Samantha. Again, thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you guys next time. Bye. This has been By George, an 80 Players at the George Theater podcast, hosted and produced by Miranda Zapes. Listen anywhere you listen to podcasts, and follow us on Instagram at By George Theater. That's THEATRE. Sure to like, share, and subscribe. And By George, we'll see y'all next time.
Main thing I remember is I had to like drop a bunch of paper. I had to climb up in the catwalk and drop a bunch of paper at the end of that play. But other than that, I don't remember what I really did other than meet Brandon. But we started hanging out a lot.
That's the only important part.
Became really, really close friends. I knew I liked him, but I'm like a very anxious, shy person. So I was like, I thought I was being really obvious about the fact that I liked him. Went home for the summer, came back, and he had a girlfriend, Rude. They dated for like 6 months, but he and I were still like best friends through all of that. Always were hanging out. So after they broke up, I was kind of like, not letting that happen again. Apparently, I need to be a little more upfront. So from that point on, we've been dating. That was in, 2013. So I think we've been dating a little over 10 years, married in 2018. So about 5.5 years. So.
My goodness. Yeah. But I ask because I know that so many people have met here at 80 Players and have gotten married. And so I was like, oh my gosh, are you another one? Did you get struck by the love
We're
bug?
an 80 Players couple, but we didn't, our origin story was not here.
Gotcha.
No, we met at Baylor. Yeah.